Hi, I'm Scott Humphrey, CEO of the World Floor Covering Association, and this is Leadership Live. Thank you for joining me again. I want to talk to you today about a term you probably heard, often is misused, but I want to better help you understand what servant leadership really is. Robert Greenleaf, in an essay that he wrote in 1970, first coined the phrase servant leadership. And here's what Greenleaf said. Servant leadership is a philosophy and set of practices that enriches the lives of others, builds better organizations, and ultimately creates a more just and caring world. Let that sink in a little bit, because probably as you think of servant leadership, there are people that come to mind. Maybe it was a teacher who really dedicated themselves to you. Maybe it was a minister or preacher who cared and stepped out of their bubble to invest themselves in your life. Maybe it was a parent or loved one. Maybe a coach who sacrificed time away from family to invest in the lives of young people. Let me give you some examples of people that I would consider servant leaders and help you understand why, and maybe that will give you a better understanding of what this term really means. I think about Abraham Lincoln, because Lincoln, at great personal cost, made a sacrifice so he could preserve the Union while freeing Southern slaves. It wasn't the easiest thing to do. In fact, if he wanted to go down as simply a leader, he could have easily let slavery continue and let the Union fall apart. But he didn't choose the easy route. At great personal sacrifice, he chose to preserve the Union and to abolish slavery. Martin Luther King is one of my favorite examples of servant leadership. King often shunned the accolades that were given to him and really wanted to be remembered for social justice. He could have done what he did in a much different way. He could have promoted violence, as we see oftentimes today, but King knew that to do that would have given him a temporary win, but not a long-term solution to the social injustice that was out there. He's a phenomenal example to me of someone who is visible and in the limelight, who is also a servant leader. Another of my favorites is Mother Teresa, who left a family where she was well cared for and went to be a missionary in Calcutta in India at great sacrifice to herself. In fact, oftentimes she was found begging on the streets for her own food and would give much of that food to those who were needy. She, at great personal cost, committed herself to being a servant leader. A great example of that is when she won the Nobel Prize, she refused to go to the banquet and asked that the prize money be given to the poor. So I thought a lot about servant leadership over the last couple of weeks, because last week, on Sunday of last week, my mother-in-law passed away, Miss Judy Leonard. And Judy to me was an example of servant leadership. Judy lived a life whose whole focus was the needs of other people, constantly doing acts of service and investing in other people. My children, her grandchildren, are a great example of that. They called her Grandy, and she was a grand individual who committed her life to making the lives of others easier. Judy probably never read a book on leadership, much less servant leadership. She didn't do this because she was seeking to be something. She did this because that's where her heart was, and that's how she was wired. Servant leadership is not focused on one's own needs, but on the needs of others. And I had a phenomenal example of that in my mother-in-law, Mrs. Judy Leonard. I hope that you will take time over the next week to think of those who have invested to you, maybe at great personal cost to themselves, and made an impact in your life. Maybe they're not a politician, maybe they're not a CEO, but that doesn't mean they can't be a leader. Leaders are people whose lives impact the lives of others. And that was the life of Judy Leonard. Thankful that she was in my life, and hope that this week you'll take time to thank those who have invested in yours. Now go out there and lead.